Today's guest is Jay Singh, founder of Casper Studios, an AI product studio that designs and develops custom AI solutions. With roots at LinkedIn and a client list spanning hedge funds, private equity firms, large enterprises, and startups, Jay specializes in building modular AI systems that get used. In this episode, he shares why small wins beat AI moonshots, how to design around trust and workflows, and where voice interfaces are going next. Jay, welcome to Just Curious.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Who is Jay Singh and what is Casper Studios?
Yeah, so my name is Jay. Grew up in the Bay Area and Vancouver, Canada. A son to two immigrants from India. I worked at LinkedIn for 5.5 years. So I was on their product and business development teams. We can kind of unpack it a little more later, but over time, like through some of the projects at LinkedIn, felt inspired to be able to go work within the AI space on my own. Over the past 2 years, we've been working on an AI implementation firm called Casper Studios, where we're helping companies to be able to either design and build external facing AI products or to be able to implement AI into workflows. And so excited to be here. It's been a ton of fun as everybody in the space within AI is noticing. Like it's moving really fast and it's really exciting. It's overwhelming at times, and our job is to be able to, regardless of the buyer, regardless of the business leader, to make it feel a little bit calmer, a little more simpler, to be able to help drive transformation in their business.
What drew you from product work at LinkedIn to founding Casper Studios and helping organizations like understand and use AI?
Yeah, there was a personal reason and a professional reason. I think both. The personal reason, my parents were always entrepreneurs. They came over from India. They, my dad was a cab driver. My mom was like a small business entrepreneur. Like I think it was always a little bit in my family to be able to maybe start a company one day. My kind of community within the San Francisco ecosystem were also out there starting companies, um, and and personally just wanted to be able to kind of give it a shot. On a professional lens, I'd worked at LinkedIn for 5.5 years. Was leading some pretty interesting projects, specifically in the trust and verification space, helping to lead their verification work stream there, and kind of got to the point where within some of the work that I was doing at LinkedIn and Microsoft, had visibility in terms of what was happening in AI, maybe like a couple months ahead of the world because of their investment in OpenAI. I got to like learn about this new kind of concept of LLMs and AI, and I got to meet the team over there maybe like 2 months ahead of ChatGPT coming out. And so through work there, just understood how big of an opportunity this could look like. And so we kind of like then pivoted into what my on my own and with a few other folks on our team to be able to kind of help other companies to integrate AI into their businesses instead of only helping like a LinkedIn or a Microsoft think about that as well. Yeah.
All right. You've worked with both Fortune hundreds and scrappy startups. What common AI mistakes do you see across the board?
I think all of them are dealing with like very similar questions in their business. On the outside, you can go look at a big staunchy like Fortune 100. You think they move pretty slowly, but a lot of times they're actually moving pretty quickly. They have like the right team set up. They've allowed their teams to be able to access these AI systems. Sometimes you go work with like a growth stage startup at like 10, 20, 30 million ARR. They're like a Series B company. And, on the outside, they look like they're moving really fast, but on the inside, they also are kind of dealing with the same types of questions. I think across both of these types of companies, what I've noticed of kind of like the biggest pitfalls that they can run into is maybe swinging for the fences a little bit too soon. There's a lot of hype around the space, and you kind of see all these like crazy success stories of businesses overnight being able to save a bunch of money and make a lot of money. In reality, like these things take time, regardless of how big these companies are. The work to integrate it into your system to make it be used every single day is not easy. It's complex. And so I think expectation setting is something that kind of is a common problem across regardless of the company, where they think that then maybe they can hit the home runs right off the bat. And then they realize that it's a lot harder to integrate, and then they kind of get disappointed and maybe like shelve the project completely instead of trying to make like iterative improvements over time.
Yeah. And like, I guess to expand on that, you've mentioned the gap between extremes where there's AI as savior or it's a grand slam versus AI as noise, which is it's kind of a waste of time or it's a distraction. What does the middle ground look like to you?
It's a new form of technology and you should act on it fast, but you don't need to be moving with like a level of like schizophrenic energy around it. Like if you're not experimenting with it right now, you should start with it, but you also don't need to feel like you're necessarily behind either. Because I think when you feel like you're maybe too late to the game, you start making irrational decisions around what you should be doing for your business. You start to maybe think about like, what's our AI strategy? How do we like do AI for everything? When in reality, like that may not be the right option, both internally and also like maybe building an external facing product for you. And so I think what I try to do when I go speak with customers, whether they're like a Fortune 500 executive or like a CEO of like a startup or like a hedge fund owner, is like just kind of calm them down and be like, it's okay. Like if you haven't started your journey, that's fine. Like let's get going now. Let's educate your team on how to be able to use these systems and start moving. And so I think the middle ground is this idea that, you should be moving in the space. You should be experimenting and trying to integrate these systems into your business, but also don't move with panic. I end up kind of feeling and hearing that behind closed doors a lot. Is like, we're way behind. Like, we don't really know what we're doing. It's almost like self-deprecating, even though these business owners are managing like massive companies and they have like big teams and they're very intelligent and sophisticated in what they do across their business. But sometimes they kind of put that aside and they get maybe a little bit insecure about their AI adoption. So I guess that's kind of the biggest thing, that is trying to find that middle ground.
Yeah. And what shifts are you seeing in how companies think about AI today versus, let's say, a year ago?
So I think a year ago, the a lot of people were maybe just like kind of starting to get onboarded individually for like these chatbots. Everybody was starting to use like ChatGPT. A lot of folks may not have been using like the more sophisticated models. They may have been using like some of the free models. They may not have kind of like turned into daily or weekly active users of like a ChatGPT, Anthropic, et cetera. What I'm noticing now is that most companies and most employees at companies are using these off the shelf tools today, at least like once a week, probably multiple times a day. And so that's been the biggest shift in terms of how I'm seeing like adoption in companies. Most people are using ChatGPT today and they understand how to use it, or Claude or something like off the shelf, regardless if they're technical or non-technical. On the technical side, I see that like any developer most developers are using like a Claude code, or they're using Windsurf, or they're using Cursor, where I felt like a year ago, engineers, even if they were really good, were still a little bit like, some of them were kind of hesitant towards it and they thought that maybe they were better, or, AI generated code is slop. So now I see from a technical perspective, I'd be surprised if like, they're not using some AI kind of coding tool to make their lives more effective. And then from a non-technical side, everybody's using like a chatbot today now. Now the work that I'm seeing is like, how do you actually like connect an enterprise in their use of these tools versus just offshoots of like, your engineering team is using Cursor, your kind of customer service team is using these things, your recruiting team is using like a ChatGPT off the shelf, and there isn't like a cohesive perspective in terms of how everybody should be using it together. But that's kind of been the shift in the market over the past year.
Yeah. And let's talk about your clients. What problems usually bring them in the door?
So it's a mix. We've worked with, I'll mention maybe one startup that we're working with right now. They're at about 50 million ARR. Their use of AI is pretty sophisticated. They use it across their day to day quite a bit. But for them, they want to actually encourage their team to be able to use AI better. And so what we're actually helping them do is, after like a discovery session, understand like what their kind of key workflows are, and actually been building some no code automations for them. We're trying to not just build it, but also show them how we built that and teach them to be able to ideally make them also equipped and excited and confident to go automate a bunch of their other workflows. And so this has been something that I've been seeing more of, especially from like tech companies, which makes sense. They want to kind of encourage your team to develop the skills to be able to build automations versus just relying on like a third party to do it on their own. Um, and so that I'm seeing more of that, which is exciting because you want to kind of upskill your team in terms of how to think about this stuff. And so that's been more recently like what kind of how clients are coming to us recently.
Yeah. And are clients coming to you with a particular workflow in mind, or are they coming to you with an interest in understanding which workflow might be best suited for a solution that you can help build? Like, what does that typically look like? I'm guessing it might be both, but yeah.
It's a little bit of both. I've actually noticed, last year people may not have been using ChatGPT or these off the shelf tools as much, and this year they are. Last year, people were coming to us with like a way more defined problem statement and workflow and what they wanted to build. This year, they're coming a little bit more open ended, which is maybe what you wouldn't expect. You would expect maybe them to have a little bit more specificity in terms of what they really wanted. Uh, And I think the reason for that is because maybe two things. One is they realize that there's probably a lot of other things that they're not even thinking about, that they'd rather just kind of outsource some of that thinking and guidance for us to be able to figure out, to go talk to everybody, to go meet with like their team, to go meet with their leaders, and then give them like a criteria in terms of how to think about what to automate first and how. Um, and then second, I think it's just us being in market a little bit more, that there's more trust. Before it's like, just do this one thing, please, and do it in the next month. Now it's like, okay, like I trust that, Jay and the Casper team like understand what's going on in the space. Just bring them in as like general people to get a good sense and lay in the land. And then we'll work with them, and they can give us like an idea of like what to automate. So, you know, it's actually becoming more broader as we move forward in the market, because I think people realize there's a lot to do.
Yeah. Is everyone who comes to Casper Studios ready for real AI adoption? And I guess what's a signal that a company is ready or not ready?
I think there's like the technical answer, and maybe they're more like I don't know, qualitative answer. Like the technical answer is, unless the data quality and like your systems and your processes are really mapped out properly, it's going to be hard to be able to kind of integrate AI into your business if you don't have a good line of sight in terms of like, what systems you're using and what workflow you actually are doing every single day. And having like a clean data set to kind of start to do work. It's difficult to get started, but it's not impossible. There's likely offshoots in your organization that do have a cleaner data set. They do have their processes documented better, and you can get going. The qualitative answer to that is, if the executives aren't using these AI tools pretty constantly, then I don't know if they're ready for it to be integrated into their business. Because they're probably misguided in terms of its potential.
Yeah.
Because if a CEO is using ChatGPT every day and like kind of messing around with Replit on the weekend and vibe coding a little bit, like they kind of understand like what it's really good at and what it's not good at. And so
Yeah.
they're asked of us to help them, are a lot more grounded in reality, because they understand how these tools are working. And they're excited to push it because they're using it every day. If the executive team or the buyer or whomever isn't experimenting with these tools already, then it's a yellow flag, or even potentially red flag, that maybe that company's not ready for it, because this takes time, it takes money. It's not as like a quick fix, and if they haven't used the tools, they may be misguided a little bit in terms of how fast this could work, and they don't know the capabilities of like where this is thus far. That's more important to me than like the technical limitations.
You shared with me a case study for a hedge fund client. Tell us what problem they came to you with it with. Tell us what problem they came to you with, and then I would love to walk through step by step how you identified and designed a solution and what the after state looked like relative to the before state. But let's start at the beginning. What was the problem?
Yeah, so this was one of those clients that had a sense in terms of what they wanted to automate already, but we're kind of curious to get our perspective on it. So they actually came in with a set of workflows. And they're like, here's like how we run our day to day, and like we're wondering if like which ones are kind of maybe the first things to automate or not. Uh, their sophistication of using AI tools were pretty solid. They were using pretty much all the off the shelf, Gemini and ChatGPT and Anthropic, to run their workflows. And I just wanted a way to be able to have one of their workflows in a more cohesive state. The specific workflow that we kind of helped them automate was their corporate access workflow. So they manage like hundreds of public equities, and in one way that they're able to generate alpha is by having conversations with the executives at those companies. It's kind of traditionally like expert network calls, corporate access. Like these are kind of similar types of workflows. For this hedge fund, it's more corporate access versus like an expert network. And so before the automation process, what they would do, and what I'm sure a lot of people do when they're doing equity research, is like, you know, you have a ticker in mind, you have a call that's like in 30 minutes with, the CFO of that company. You need to be able to figure out what to ask them. And that process is usually like, like sprinting and downloading a bunch of like different PDFs from their their investor relations website, getting their 10Q, getting their earnings transcript, taking a look at their own like financial model to see, like if they had any notes in there, maybe looking at their OneNote to see like how previously like other questions were asked and other kind of answers were given, to be able to generate like the right questions to be able to go speak with them with. So that could have taken like maybe half an hour to 45 minutes per equity. And that was kind of like the first module that we helped them build is like Q&A generation to plug into all the different data sets that they needed publicly. And also the data sets they needed within their own company, like their SharePoint, their OneNote, all the financial models in Excel, to be able to kind of give them like the right questions to ask. And so that was the first module. Do you want me to kind of go to the next ones, or?
Yeah, no, I mean, well, I would love to walk through all the modules, but maybe before we do, you mentioned a module, and so like
Hmm.
you chose a modular system over a monolithic build. Maybe first tell us like what is a module, and then secondly, like why was a modular system the right move in this case versus something more monolithic?
Yeah, a module in this case could be defined as like a workflow. It could also just be defined as like an agent. It's just like a certain amount of steps that we've just been able to automate. The I guess terminology that we chose in this case was like a module. We've been using this on like interchangeably with like an agent or a workflow automation. In terms of like why we chose this, I'd give credit to our customer actually. I mean, it's been super fun working with them. They're clearly like extremely sophisticated in how they think about their business and their work. And I think one thing that we saw not work in the past is not building modularly. I think the way that he framed it for us, which we've kind of taken around with it, which is this idea of like hitting singles and doubles, just like focus on small wins and try to compound it over time versus like going for the moonshot. I think that's why there's maybe like dissatisfaction within like enterprises in terms of AI integration, is because they kind of go for the home run right off the bat. They go build for like 6 months and they come back with something that kind of like the edge case. There's too many edge cases for it to actually like work effectively, and they just kind of scrap it and go back to something that they're using already. There was like that MIT study around like 95% of enterprise adoption is like not working, and it's hard to go really deep into like exactly why those companies said them. My hypothesis is because like they thought that they like we're gonna automate everything. Everything's agentic. It's like, well, why don't we just do this first thing first, like, and build trust in that system, that it can generate the right questions, and then like make iterations on that, and then we can also build that relatively quickly because it's just one discrete module. And so, yeah, I think it's been helpful to kind of build in this like modular perspective to set that right expectations and then build over time versus like building everything right off the bat and expecting something to be incredibly valuable from day one.
Right. Let's jump back into the case study. So you built the first module, and then where did you go from there?
So the next, if you were to step back into the workflow that they usually do, then after they kind of figure out the right questions and they want to go have the conversation, once they have the conversation, those meetings are usually transcribed. And then, they can put that back into like a platform to be able to synthesize. And so that was like the second module, simpler, which is effectively like now that you've got the questions, you've asked the questions, you've been on the meeting, you transcribed it, and you push that transcript back into the platform, which then enables the third module, which is this idea of like, okay, based on anything they said, and based on your financial projections of that business, is there anything that dictates that you should maybe buy, sell, or hold this company? Did the person did one of the executives say that like, margin is maybe worse than expected? And like that little statement, if like transcribed and tracked and like mapped to what their existing model said it was going to be, maybe gives them an indication that actually margin is going to be at 8% instead of like 9%, and because of that we should maybe like sell. And so at the end of the day, like they have the decision making in terms of what investment they make, but this at least equips them with the right information faster. And they can maybe be able to manage more public equities because they don't have to go through the synthesis for every single one of them all the time. So yeah, those are kind of the three different modules so far.
Interesting. And how did you train the third module to ensure that you're not getting recommendations that are not relevant? For example, maybe someone on the call, as an aside, says something about, you know, he has fewer cats today than he had yesterday, and fewer is less than was before, and there's some sort of interpretation that that might mean something for the business. That's obviously an extreme example, but like, yeah, how do you train that to ensure that the recommendations are based in logic and financial logic and
Mhm.
investing logic, and not the opposite?
Yeah, this is why this stuff takes time, because the reality of this is like you would need just to be there with them, like looking at the responses over time and then just updating it from there. Like a lot of this work is honestly just like running through the system, having it come out, and then giving them the observability around how the responses came to be. So, if we say that this is like recommendation, we need to be able to open up kind of like how if you run like a big ChatGPT query and you see like all the I'm looking into this document and then I'm checking this thing. Like for a certain element of that, we're actually showing our work. We got this from this transcript, which then led to like this like specific model potentially changing. And so we're like kind of visibly showing them how we did the work. And then they need to be able to take a look at it and say, okay, like this doesn't make sense or not. So we have like a mechanism both like in the product and also just like through Slack and like through conversations for them to give feedback to us so we can then go back, make another revision on it, like work on it, improve it. This is the stuff that people don't really talk about for some reason with AI implementation is like a lot of the stuff is like hand holding. A lot of the stuff is like just sitting down and like seeing if they like it or not and like why they don't and then making improvements on it, going back to them and then just, just doing that as much as you possibly can. And so yeah, like that is needed for all these different AI systems today. So yeah, there's like the technical, like we'll show our work. We use like kind of we use platforms like Langfuse and Wayfound to be able to kind of have some observability and performance management of those agents. So you can put in rules and say, okay, if they say like anything, if they pull up any information about cats and it dictates like a recommendation, like please monitor this and like bubble it up to us. And then there's also the third element, which is just like we're just sitting down with them and getting insights all the time.
Yeah. And when we think about what you built for them, what did it ultimately save them in terms of time and efficiency and decision making quality? What did that after state look like relative to the before state?
Yeah, so before to kind of look through the Q&A for each of these different equities, that alone may have taken like maybe 15 to 30 minutes. And now, the process takes some time because it's just like running the query, but you're kind of just like, you can run a couple of them in parallel. So now it's down to around like 5 minutes. And then when you think about the analysis of like, should this be a buy, sell, or hold? That's a little bit harder to quantify, to be honest, but roughly like they may spend another hour just like kind of looking through the model, like, reviewing everything. And now, we try to bring that down to around like 20 to 30 minutes. And so, it's effectively cutting down the process for the Q&A generation by, 80%. And then it's bringing down the time saving for like the analysis by maybe like 50%. And this is probably like 6 months into the build. And so hopefully we can kind of improve that over time.
Yeah. And I was gonna ask you how long was this process to go from, I guess, discovery through having something in production?
So this goes back to the modular piece. Like you could actually get something into production as like a beginning baseline pretty fast. We ran through like a discovery phase that lasted like 2 to 4 weeks, and then by the time there was like something that they could use and start testing, it took another like 2 to 4 weeks. And so like all in like 2 months in, there was something that they can start using and iterating on and giving us feedback on while we also started to build out the rest of the modules. For other companies, it can go even faster where like the first, we're working with a company right now to integrate like agents that are off the shelf on no code tools. After like a 2 week discovery phase, like within a couple of days, we can start to launch like some of these agents. And so again, if you're building modularly, you can start to get value pretty fast. If you're waiting for something to be automated, that's like really, button up and like very tight across like multiple teams, multiple workflows, that'll take some time to build, but you can get to something in production like relatively simply.
You mentioned integration. Presumably they have a bunch of tools, a stack at the hedge fund. How important was integrating this solution into their existing set of tools? What were those tools, and how did you go about doing that?
Yeah, I think this is another thing that most people aren't really thinking about and talking about in these AI systems is like it's not really that valuable until you have integrations into either the vendors you use or your internal kind of, Google Drive, like SharePoint, etc. And so, some of the APIs for the financial information are readily accessible. Um, Using basic information like earnings transcripts, 10Qs, like those are pretty easy to pull from a number of different APIs. When you start getting into things like meeting transcripts, or information you find within like maybe, like, not going to name any names, but like big vendors that a lot of financial institutions use to be able to run their day-to-day workflows. A lot of them are more restrictive in terms of the data that they want to share outside of their platform, because they, my sense is like if they continue to kind of externalize that data, then maybe they reduce the value of even a user coming onto that platform. And so that sometimes can be a challenge to be able to get access to like some of their systems of record. For us, we were able to kind of still integrate to what they needed from like an external vendor perspective. Some of them, again, are easy to use via API. Some of them may need like custom deals to be done with those vendors to be able to pull some of that data via an API. And then there's like their internal SharePoint information within like Microsoft or Google. Today, these are simpler to be able to access. There's like pretty good coverage in terms of both, the Microsoft suite and the Google suite in terms of plugging into both of those like file systems to be able to pull in your financial models or your OneNotes or your Google Docs. The integrations are there, but sometimes it could be kind of hairy to get around as well. Our engineers like hate working on some of those like OneNote integrations because it could be tough to kind of plug into those ecosystems, but it's
Yeah.
possible today.
I want to go back to the point you were making around people oftentimes wanting to swing for the fences, hit a grand slam when it comes to AI. You said that starting small is the right way to go about doing it, that it builds momentum. Tell me a little bit about that philosophy and, what leads kind of ambitious projects to often stall?
So I think it's like being grounded in maybe like what the market is maybe not saying. And I think more and more people are noticing that it does take some time, and you should be kind of hitting the singles and doubles more now than even like 6 months ago. I think like these projects are failing because again, there's misaligned expectations in terms of what people think is possible in a certain given amount of time. And maybe like what the platforms and vendors are like over promising, or just like a disconnect between like the capabilities of the models that they use off the shelf on ChatGPT, which are incredible, then to actually connect it into like a workflow, because again, these data access questions are not easy. And so there's also misalignment there. You're like, but I can do this here. Like, why can't I do that there? It's like, well, it's because it's going to take time, and you need to map out these workflows, and you like, this person's off like sick, and they're your Salesforce admin, and and so like there's all these other nitty gritty, more like tactical change management stuff that is difficult to get plugged in. So I think again, these small wins are helpful. I can actually give you a totally different perspective on that too, if you want,
Oh,
which
yeah,
I've
let's
been
play.
meditating on a little bit, which is like which
Yeah.
is a
Okay.
complete inverse of that, just to kind of just
Yeah.
to play devil's advocate myself. I've been trying to study like previous like generations of technology and like how they kind of were adopted, and who won and who didn't, and all this kind of stuff. And I think people talk a lot about like the internet and electricity and the mobile phones, etc. I've been studying more about like shipping containers, like in like the 1930s, 1950s. I think more in the 1950s and 60s, you started to see like the new technology of like a shipping container being able to go across the world and ship a bunch of goods. The companies that ended up the ports and the cities, ports were the companies, but also the cities that kind of integrated it, like they hit the singles and doubles. They maybe like set up like one port in like the kind of offshoot of like their coast, and like they allowed it to kind of come in and dock and then pull up a bunch of stuff. They were outcompeted by the cities that actually ended up totally reimagining their ports and cities around this new technology. So, like a good example of that was like San Francisco and Oakland. While they're right beside each other, San Francisco kind of lost like the port kind of story, and everything's in Oakland today. That's why when you're living in San Francisco, you see like these big like shipping containers like come underneath the Golden Gate Bridge and park like in Oakland, because they like reimagine like that entire kind of like physical space, and they're like, this is all going to be oriented around like the shipping container. So it's like this idea of like, instead of integrating technology to your company, you just integrate the company to the technology.
Yeah.
And so as I think about these singles and doubles, which are effective and they are working, the part of me is also like, maybe actually for some companies and for some industries, we should just take the inverse approach where like try to hit the home run, but maybe just like understand what you're doing. Understand that this is very high risk. It's probably not going to work. And maybe there's another work stream you can do to also be hitting the singles and doubles as you're hitting the home run. So I don't know. Like the reality is like the space is moving so fast, so it's hard to get a grasp in times. But I've been trying to challenge my own thinking a little bit on that.
Yeah, no, I love that like story. And I guess, when it comes to AI, the singles and doubles are beneficial because they create momentum, and momentum is, oxygen, as they say.
Yeah.
And so maybe, sort of roadmap or the strategy or the overarching kind of North Star is around, the home run, around becoming the AI native business, around kind of shaping the company to the technology with an understanding that the future is going to look very different from the present. But the easiest way to get there is to start with a single and a double and then
Right.
build on that and maybe not
Yeah.
stop there.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Or do it in a way that that's like kind of building like, a knowledge base or like a brain, like a nucleus of like a company. And so, when you're building these different automations, can they maybe be like stored in like a similar platform? Can the insights be shared in like a similar Google Drive? Like, can the learnings be shared like at a company all hands? So like everybody is like kind of up to speed on what's going on. So it's like, yeah, it's like this idea of like hitting the singles and doubles, but then maybe like sharing them to everybody else technically and also just, verbally, like, through conversation so everybody gets up to speed. I don't know. Like honestly, I'm trying to think through this live. And so I don't know if you ever have any guidance or thoughts on it. I'm
Yeah.
trying to
I mean,
challenge
we're
myself.
all trying to figure it out. So,
Yeah.
and hopefully we will. As we come to a close, I'd love to ask you some like advice related questions. And so first, for someone who is listening and they want to bring AI into the organization, what's one question they should ask their team tomorrow?
I think like keep it simple. Like what's one thing that you did, over the past like week that saved you a bunch of time?
Yeah.
Like, just like, because I think like leaders are doing a better job at it now, but early on, like there's a lack of psychological safety for employees to even talk about how they're using AI because there are companies that banned like using ChatGPT and like off the shelf tools, and the internal tools they use suck. Like I know this from like even big tech company like friends. Like externally they're talking about AI, but like internally like they're on GPT-4 and they don't have like the provisioning for GPT-5 because like it's a data privacy thing, and like they have to go through procurement again. Like it's just a whole pain in the ass. And so they're all using ChatGPT like off the shelf, like, incorrectly, like, and not caring as much about data privacy and everything, which sucks. But just ask them, like, what are you doing? Like, how are you using this? And then try to kind of use that as like a grounds up way to then shape your roadmap. A lot of people are using this individually really well. It's just like they're not going to like openly kind of out themselves to a company and tell them like how they're like, using it off the shelf because it's technically not allowed for them. So I think creating that psychological safety and saying like, hey, I'm still curious though, in terms of, what you're using and how you're using it would be beneficial for, companies up and down, like no matter how big they are.
Yeah. And what's one small but high leverage project you'd recommend as a first AI win?
Maybe it's actually like a extension of what I was just talking about of like trying to get a sense from your teammates and your employees how they're currently using AI today. Um, I think a voice and AI are an interesting space right now. It feels like they've just kind of like, gotten over a hurdle in terms of the effectiveness of these models. And one thing that we do, and I think everybody can do themselves, when they're starting to think about where to implement AI, is to survey their team. And so we as external consultants come in and just talk to their leadership and get to know them and like understand like what their business is like and what their workflows are and their strategy, et cetera. But a lot of times we don't have the actual capacity or the time to go talk to everybody in their team, especially if they're a bigger company. And so now what we do is we kind of share a voice agent to them using just like off the shelf 11 labs that then is like sort of trained on how we think about the world and like ask questions. And then that agent asks like the questions for everybody else we just don't have time to talk to. And like we started doing that a few months ago, and it's just so impactful how valuable the information that we're getting from it is. The company we did this with, like I think, I think 40 employees, like, you know, out of 30 employees on their team that were servicing, 22 people filled it out. And like the average duration of the conversation was 10 minutes. And some people spiked up to 45 minutes of a conversation. So literally just like telling us all their pain points, all the stuff that they don't like doing. And that's going to help us like understand what to automate first. And I think you can do that for your team, right? Like do it as like an employee voice survey 2.0. Do not give any Google Forms, any like, employee voice little button kind of whatever. Send a voice agent to them, ask them like, hey, how they're feeling generally. It could just be like broader kind of not AI related guidance and just like a sense of what's going on at your company. And then you can also have one that's more AI specific. Be like, how are you using it today? What are you excited about? And I think that can give you one input in terms of the roadmap for your AI initiatives at your company.
Cool. Who should reach out to Jay and Casper Studios?
So we've been servicing growth stage startups, Series A, Series B companies, Fortune 100s to be able to kind of do a lot of this work. And also obviously a hedge funds. And so if you fit within those demographics, like message us. More and more our focus is actually being spent on helping private equity firms and their portfolio companies. And so, within that kind of niche, if you're in private equity and you're an operating partner trying to think about like how AI could be like a value creation lever for your portcos. We're finding a lot more kind of like traction and success over there where we can kind of, focus on one portco, like run this whole like, analysis and discovery and automation development with them and then roll out for the rest of the portcos. And so we're early in our journey in that space, but we're seeing a lot more traction. I think there's a big opportunity for these private equity firms to be able to think about AI as like a new like value creation lever.
Awesome. Jay, thank you for coming by. Just curious.
Thanks for having me.